Hi there, my name is David Miller. I'm a Phoenix, Arizona multimedia artist, and this week we are going to cover how to retouch faces using Adobe Photoshop and Lightroom. There's tasteful editing, and then there's over-the-top editing. We're going to focus on the tasteful editing, which means correcting basic flaws, correcting skin tones, eliminating stray hairs, and generally portraying our subjects in the most flattering way possible. We will be using Adobe Photoshop and Adobe Lightroom for retouching purposes. Currently, Adobe packages both of these together as a $10 a month subscription. But if you are the kind of person who only likes to work in one program, go ahead and look at the relevant lesson. I'm sure you'll get something out of it. Your project for this class is very simple. You're going to take a headshot of an individual. You're going to retouch it using the steps I've laid out in the class. And you're going to post it to the Skillshare project page. Let's begin. So we're going to be retouching faces, and we're going to work in both Lightroom and Photoshop. When you subscribe to Adobe's Creative Cloud, even if you just get the photography subscription, which is $10 a month, you get both of these programs. So I feel like they're both useful for photography. I wouldn't want one without the other. I do the majority of my work in Lightroom. And if you're unfamiliar with Lightroom, you have your modules. Your organization is library, develop is where you do your editing, and then the other ones are all finishing modules that we aren't going to be touching this time around. So I'm going to close this panel, and this is my starter photograph. Everything is set to 0. It's been totally untouched. When you are planning on retouching somebody's face, and that's what we're going to focus on, it's best, of course, to get great lighting, correct white balance, all that fun stuff when you shoot it. Sometimes you think you shot it great, and when you dump it in the computer, you see a lot of problems. So before I start correcting any skin flaws or any lines on her face, I am going to correct those basic things that I should have done when I was shooting it. And that's exposure. Pump it up a little bit. It's very yellowy all around. I'm going to suck out some of that in this HSL area under saturation. I know it's yellowy, one because the histogram tells me so, but also because my own eyeballs tell me so. And I remember when I shot this in 2013 that this was a white backdrop, not this off-white color you see here. So suck out the yellow, skin tone gets a lot better. And anything else I need to do, any basic correction? Maybe take the contrast down a little bit. Here's the thing about faces. Harshness, contrast, does not look very appealing at all. And you can, of course, correct this by having your person lit on both sides equally, but the way I've shot this, just a little less contrast is ideal. Okay, we've corrected our white balance, we've corrected our exposure, we've corrected our contrast. Let's dig in to the face. The first step I'm going to do when retouching in Lightroom is I'm going to soften the skin up. And we use a brush for this. So these controls are global edits. They affect everything in the picture, but this is your brush. It only affects the areas you brush on. Lightroom comes with a custom brush called Soften Skin, and this is what it looks like. It takes the clarity down to minus 100, excuse me, and bumps the sharpness up 25. When you brush over somebody, it has kind of a plasticky look to it. And just to show you what that looks like when you affect the entire photo, if I take clarity to minus 100, it looks pretty bad. It looks like an iPhone app version of skin retouching. So don't want to do that. Where I'm okay with clarity being when I soften skin is somewhere around minus 60, minus 49. Enough to actually soften skin, and eliminate some pores. But not enough to cause a real problem, make it look fake. When in doubt, if you don't know if you're going too far, take your clarity or whatever function you're using, take it all the way up to 100 or down to minus 100, and you can work in those extremes and then bump it up to sort of the safe zone that I've been talking about, minus 40, minus 45. When you're in the develop module, you also can turn on a before and after thing, so you can see what you're up to, and you can already see a big difference between adding exposure, correcting the color, and just doing that brush versus what we started out with. Let me turn that off for now so I have my computer real estate to work in. If you forget where you've brushed, or you've done what I just did and backed out of your brush, this is the pin from when I first put it on. I hover over it. You see all the red area? That's what I've brushed on. So, try again. Did not get her chin yet. You have an option to turn on that mask overlay. Also, when you click the pin, now it's active. I'm going to resize this. When it's active and I brush around, then I'm doing the same exact thing I did before, which is currently clarity minus 100, sharpness to 25. I told you guys that I didn't really like it at minus 100 because it looks fake, so I'm going to take it to minus 49. And if this is something I use on a regular basis, an edited softened skin brush, I can actually save that. Here it says save current settings as new preset, and you would give it a title and save it. This is actually what I have here. So if you're in Lightroom and you have your pull down menu in the brush here, in the brush tool, and you don't see these things that say like dramatic sky, black and white eyes, black and white eye enhance, that's because these are presets I saved as a new preset. So my soften skin better is clarity minus 41, sharpness plus 20. Now I brushed around her face. You'll notice I did not hit her eyes and I did not hit her mouth. There are a couple reasons for that. One, we actually want clarity in the eyes because eyes are the gateway to the soul. It's what we connect with. Unless you're doing some kind of special effect, those are the things you want the sharpest in your photo. Also because they have rods and cones and eyelashes and stuff like that, it looks kind of silly when they're soft and dull. Same with the lips, although there's a little scar on her lip there. I'll correct that a different way. I'm not going to use this softened skin brush for that. The next step in retouching a face in Lightroom is to use this tool here. This is your spot editor. And of course you have sizing here, but a lot of the times I resize it by using the brackets on the keyboard. It's easier just to tap it or to hold it down and see it shrink like that. Much like my brush, there's an inner circle and an outer circle to the brush. Inner circle is the effect you're putting on, outer circle is the feathering. So like that, you see how it's a very soft circle. Anything in the inner brush affects it and then it tapers off. That's the way you want to do all of your skin retouching, because hard lines on the face is only going to make it worse. So the way to get a hard line, if you were curious, is to pull the feathering down all the way. Let's turn the flow up. So that's what a hard line does. If we take the mask overlay off, and then we do things like push up exposure, you can see how that is not a good way to edit a human being. This spot tool, same thing, has feathering. So if I pull the feathering all the way down and I click here, it clones the mouth and it gives it a very hard outline there. Probably not what you want to do to your person if you're doing genuine retouching. Turn the feathering up. The size as much as you need it, which is usually, because I'm getting rid of spots on her face, very, very small. And I'm going to work with this option called heal rather than this option called clone. So heal will take pixels and blend them with what you're already covering up. So there was a spot there, click that, it grabbed the pixels here, blended them perfectly. Clone literally will take the pixels and stamp them in that spot. So this is clone, switch to heal. A lot more subtle when you use the heal tool instead of clone. If you're borrowing pixels from like areas, it's going to blend a lot better than if you borrow pixels from way different areas. So this actually might work here, but I wouldn't recommend grabbing light pixels to heal a dark area. It's much easier just to pick something that's similar but doesn't have those flaws. This spotting session could go on for a long period of time, and you might even want to work closer to your individual, like super close. I got close by hitting Control plus or Command plus on the Apple, but I believe it's Control plus on the Windows computers. Command or Control minus takes you out. The way to get around in Lightroom is the navigator. You can see me flying around here. And I'll be honest with you, if you have a lot of spots to correct or scars or lines on the face, this could be a tedious process. I recommend finding something that entertains you without distracting you so you get it done. In my case, I listen to podcasts or music when I do this. Sometimes I watch a movie. It probably will take, on a face that has spots like we see here, this is probably a 10-minute job. When there's only a couple, it's like a 30-second job or less. But it's got to be done, because if you're doing work for a client, or you put this photo on Facebook and you did not correct flaws that you could have corrected, it's pretty likely you'll get an angry email or a dissatisfied customer. It's expected today that we retouch faces and get rid of flaws. Now, if it's something that's normal on the person's face, like this scar on the lip, and not temporary like the spots, then that might be a conversation you have with your client, whether you want to leave it or not. If you remember, famous supermodel Cindy Crawford had a mole on the side of her face, and I believe there are times when it's been retouched out and people were confused because they expected to see that on Cindy Crawford. Everybody knew she had it, and it wasn't there. Definitely something that was worthy of a conversation before they took the time to retouch stuff like that out. If you're not working this close, you're probably going to miss a lot of stuff. Or you might notice that your pasting is in wrong places. If you need to retouch out a line, like these lack lines that people usually have on the sides of their nose, or the lines underneath their eyes, you can do that with this tool. You just want to hold down your mouse and stretch it. One of the things about Lightroom's spot tool that I'm not a big fan of is that you cannot change the brush shape. So you can change the brush size. You can have smaller circles or larger circles, but you cannot make this into a rectangle, triangle, square, other kinds of brushes you might want to use. One of the other flaws in editing in Lightroom is that if you already have an area that's halfway covered or fully covered by your spot retouch tool, you cannot place a new spot down. So you'll notice right now it's a spot removal tool. Move over to this area, it becomes that Mickey Mouse glove. It's because I already have something there. We'll see in Photoshop that that's not the case. You can retouch over and over and over and over. Okay. So that's a lot of spots. I'm going to have a few more to finish up. The areas that people generally have lines on their face, whether they're young or old, we mentioned the lack lines on the side of the nose, the eye socket, which I did not retouch that fully out. Like that. And then the corners of the mouth, not a lot of problems there. That this area I'm probably going to have to work on in Photoshop because it's kind of a weird placement here. We got teeth, we got lips, we got the scar, and then we got a little indentation here. When things are complicated like this, you are better off working in Photoshop because you can change your brushes and you can overlap your retouches. The way to get your work into Photoshop is to right click on it in your film strip bar here, edit in Adobe Photoshop. Here's our image. After I'm done with my work here, I'm going to save it, and it's going to appear alongside the film strip as probably a TIFF file. This is how I have my Lightroom set up. So if you'll notice, the original file is a NEF file. That's a Nikon RAW image. You don't overwrite RAW images. When you save them, they save as JPEGs or TIFFs, and in this case it's going to save as a TIFF. So now that I'm in Photoshop, the main retouching tools are the clone stamp and then the healing brush. Why is the healing brush above the clone stamp with the paintbrush in the middle? Not really sure. But when I need to do surgery on an image, I usually default to the clone stamp. So what do I mean by surgery? I mean retouching out something that's large enough that blending tools aren't going to work, or a car in the background would be large enough if I needed to retouch that out. I would have to borrow pixels from a variety of places to clone out that car. Or in the case of her arms, these lines here. Now, by no means is this model these lines are the kinds of things that I would commonly get emails, why didn't you retouch that out? It makes me look overweight. And by no means is this model so anywhere there's lines or folds, these are very common on people whether they're overweight or skinny, but it's the kind of thing that you're expected to retouch out. The scar on the lip, unless it was specified by the client to keep it. If I use the clone stamp tool, I have to click Alt on good pixels and then click to paste over wherever I need to. Same goes for the healing brush tool. You define your area that you're borrowing from first, and then you paste over. So to make it look like it's not all cloned or borrowed from the same areas, I click Alt a lot. I pick from a lot of different areas. Here. What happens if you get too close where there's a boundary? With the healing tool, it's going to blend it. It's going to pull pixels here, and it looks really bad. It looks like her makeup is smeared. So I'm going to undo that by hitting Command Z. If you need to undo a variety of actions and you're not familiar with Photoshop, you do have a tab called History. And if you don't have History here, you go Window, make sure History is checked. Then it should be over here somewhere, and you can back up these spaces. Lightroom also has a history panel that is located here, and you can back up any number of steps. Even if this was a year later, I would be able to back up that far. Anyways, clone tool. I can alter my feathering here. So this is the equivalent of that feather area in Lightroom. If the hardness is set to 0, it's very soft. If it's at 84%, it's going to have a little harder edge. That's ideal for retouching near a boundary. So candidates that are near boundaries, well, these lines on the neck, I'll usually give it a shot first with the healing brush tool, and if that doesn't work, I'll go to the clone stamp. Also hair. Hair is something that is very difficult to retouch in Lightroom because, again, the shape of the brush and the ability to get around in it. This is definitely a candidate for clone stamp. I also see a spot that was on my sensor. Sometimes those sensors aren't, those sensor spots aren't that obvious, and you'll get used to seeing them, but one way to make sure that you can see it is to turn up the curves on your photo. I'm going to go Adjustment, Layer, Curves, pull it down, and I see a spot here, spot here, spot here, spot here, spot here. All of this stuff becomes a lot more apparent when you darken the photo. None of these are on the face, but they still make a difference. And if you have dust on your sensor, then eventually some of these are going to end up on the face. I'll do a quick clone out of them. I'll do a quick clone. Take the hardness to 50%. Alt, make sure I'm working on the right layer. If it doesn't look right, we're going to use healing brush. Grab it. There, it's gone. Grab it, get rid of that, get rid of that, get rid of that, get rid of that. Make sure. Take the hardness down. Take care of that. The fact that this photo is currently dark is only a function of the curves layer existing. So once I'm done with this retouching, I'm going to throw that curves layer away. That. I think I took care of most of it. Throw the curves layer in the trash. Spot on her clavicle could be a shadow, could be a bruise, could be natural. Doesn't matter. It needs to be fixed. Rid of that. Same with this red line, it's probably a scratch. So I've heard that there are phone apps that allow you to retouch a face, and I've actually seen these on professional models and actors and stuff, and the truth is that you have to get very close up to your person to retouch them, and working on a phone just does not allow that. Sometimes you want to smooth the skin out a little bit. Sometimes there's uneven makeup on your person. One method that I sort of save as a last resort is to create a new layer up here, and then I'm essentially going to put makeup on her by sampling what I think is sort of the middle range of the skin, so maybe the middle of her forehead, because it's very bright over here and it's much darker over here. Sample that color using this thing that looks like a turkey baster. It's the eyedropper tool. Now I have that color here. Use the brush, take the hardness down, and it's going to be just like brushing on makeup. Only thing is, you're going to have to hit all of her skin. So 330 pixels is good for this. It looks bad when you start doing this, and I've actually seen magazine covers where they left something like this on, made the person look like a Barbie doll of some sort. But you're not going to leave it like this. In fact, you're going to go into your opacities, take it down, and your blending modes. Something like lighten or soften light. No, soft light doesn't seem to be working on this. Something like lighten look a lot better. Big difference on our person once I get done with this. We're introducing a consistent element to the skin. And I'm making a few mistakes because I'm getting outside of her arms. That's the big no-no. You don't want to have situations like this where it kind of fluffs out and gives a halo. Once I make sure I've got it all painted on, and I can see it better if it's in normal mode with the opacity turned all the way up. Okay. Then I'm going to switch it to lighten. I'm going to take opacity down to something in the neighborhood of 14% or so. See what it looks like without, with slightly more consistent. You can still see areas that need brushing. And for our purposes, I'm going to collapse these layers, though if I was doing this for a client, I probably wouldn't collapse the image entirely until I got final approval from them. Zoom in on those stray hairs. Stray hairs are the hardest things to retouch out. These aren't bad because they're floating in the middle of nowhere. So it's just a simple matter of clone stamp, clone stamp. If these were going over her forehead, it would be a real pain to get out. Because what happens with stray hairs? I think I have one example up here. This hair runs over all these hairs going at a totally different angle. For me to clone those out, I have to be about this big, and I have to constantly grab from other areas, but I need to rebuild the curve. So this hair needs to curve down into here to make any sense. Not so easy. If this is what happens if I clone and try and make a curve on my own. See, I've just made the problem worse. What's the best solution? The best solution is to pay attention when you're shooting and make sure that if you're trying to do something that has a particular hairstyle or a particular aesthetic or a particular level of beauty, that you clean that stuff up when you shoot it. It can be retouched out, but it's going to take a lot of time. So let's save this and head back to Lightroom. We're going to do one more bit of retouching. Save. And it's being added to my Lightroom catalog right here. Now it's the TIFF edit. This last bit of retouching I'm going to do is her eyes. I'm going to brighten them up. She has pretty bright eyes to start with. And Lightroom does come with another one of those fancy brushes, Iris Enhance. They call Iris Enhance plus 35 in exposure, plus 40 in saturation, and plus 10 in clarity. Let's see what that does with the preset brush. By the way, Don't see a feather. Need to turn it up. Okay. Sizing it to be the size of the iris. Gonna go around. If I get above the pupil, I need to shrink it down because I don't want to cross over the eyelashes. Not sure I see a difference. Let's hit done. We'll do a before and after. Slight difference. It looks a little more saturated. Try again. If you take the exposure up all the way, you're going to make your person look like an alien. Let me quickly add that to this eye so you can get the full effect. So as you can see, it has gone too far. I'm going to take it down a little bit. I really don't recommend going over 0.5 if you're enhancing eyes. But if you turn clarity up, clarity darkens areas. It makes it look a little more muddy. It looks a little sharper as well, but you can see the difference. When clarity's down, it's kind of bright and dull. When clarity's up, it's kind of grungy and dark. So if you turn clarity up, you'll probably have to turn exposure up a little bit too. And a little added contrast doesn't hurt. Depends on the eyes of the person or the animal that you're working with, but sharper eyes, smoother skin, painted on makeup, I think our face is looking pretty good. Let's compare it to the original version of this photo. So I'm going to jump back here. This is the photo with, I think, nothing added to it. Big difference. There's other parts of the body that need some work. I might enhance the makeup on her. Actually, I'm not sure if she has any nail polish on there. If it is, it's kind of a clear thing. And I would probably retouch out these lines, or at least make them smaller. But it's not a huge difference in the process from what we've done on our person's skin. And so in library mode of Lightroom, there is an export function. Let's take a quick look from where we started to where we ended up, and I'm pretty pleased with this. For your project, you need to post your retouched image to the Skillshare project page. To do that, choose your image from the film strip, hit export. I would give it a name, retouched. It's going to be a JPEG. You can limit the file size if you want. 72 pixels per inch, the long edge 14 inches, and that gives us a good idea of what your image looks like. Choose your location to export to, hit export. I hope you got something out of this lesson and enjoyed retouching faces. It's definitely a marketable skill and one you'll use a lot if you end up doing any sort of portrait photography. Thanks for watching.